So I want to talk about Delegate Amanda Batten's most recent weekly update and what's happening in the General Assembly. So here on February 16, 2024, she's given you her version of how week 6 went. And I just want to discuss where she claims that the Democrats used a political maneuver to fast-track House Bill 404 straight to the House floor for a vote without allowing the patron to explain the bill or hearing any testimony and rejecting a committee member's amendment to correct language. Now, before we go any further, it's worth noting that during this heated debate, one of her fellow Republican colleagues actually stood up and admitted that their very party did the exact same thing when they held the majority in a previous session, fast-tracking a bill to the floor, forcing a vote, and that he didn't think it was a good idea, but he agreed to do it anyways, but he doesn't think that Democrats should do it this time. But let's actually break down what House Bill 404 by Delegate Tim Griffin did. It was addressing the use of funds prohibited when it comes to abortion. So first, this bill stated that no agencies of the Commonwealth, i.e. publicly funded health insurances like, say, Medicaid, could be used at facilities such as emergency hospitals, OBGYNs, private clinics, or maybe Planned Parenthoods that have abortion services available at their facility. You cannot use health insurance there. So even if you go to a hospital because you're having appendicitis or, you broke your arm or you're in a car accident, if you go there and they provide abortion care, you cannot use your state-funded health insurance to cover your services in that visit. But Delegate Griffin didn't stop there. He also added language that stated the bill would repeal provisions authorizing the Board of Health to use state general funds appropriated to the Department of Health to pay for the cost of abortions that were a result of rape and incest that was reported to law enforcement or a public health agency. And it would also not allow for the termination of a pregnancy with a fetal abnormality that is not compatible with life. I also need you to understand that Tim Griffin, the man that wrote this bill, is a lawyer. He is fully aware of what language means as it applies to the law and what the intent of the bill he put forth was for. He knew that it was going to eliminate all abortions across the table being used by low-income families that possibly have something like Medicaid, okay? He also knew that the ramifications of this bill would mean that you cannot access healthcare facilities like emergency care or OBGYNs or even Planned Parenthood, where over 97% of their services are not abortion. You would not be able to access services at those providers because now your insurance can no longer be used there because of his law. This was intentional. Now she's claiming he didn't know the intent of his bill, which again, he's a lawyer, and that they wanted to add exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. But they don't want to add exceptions for fetal abnormalities that are not compatible outside the womb. And they also don't want to make any accommodations to ensure you can still access facilities, especially if the facilities are the only facilities available to you in your area with this type of insurance. And here's something else worth noting. Now, again, a Republican admitted that they had previously done this before to Democrats to force a vote because they wanted them to go on record on a particular issue. The difference, however, is when that happened in that session, the Democrats had heated debate, they asked to strike the bill, and it wasn't strucken, and they voted on it, okay? They did not retaliate. They did not demand that the decision by Speaker Todd Gilbert at the time was overruled. They simply put it to a vote, but not the Republicans. When the Republicans were denied the ability to strike the bill, and again, Tim Griffin could have stricken the bill at the very beginning of this process when he realized the language was horrible, they instead decided to try to overrule Speaker Don Scott. So they took a voice vote and tried to take away his power and force him to strike the bill. And in response to that decision, there were some changes made to the committees. Now, at the end of the day, one sole Republican voted yes for the bill as its current language, which that in itself is horrible, but the rest of them voted against it, including the very patron that wrote the bill. And this is just another example of Delegate Batten using her weekly newsletter to give you an alternate reality of what actually happened, even going as far as painting the Republicans as a whole as victims, while leaving out a lot of important details. As always, facts matter, and I will continue to shine light on what's actually happening in the General Assembly. Make sure you do too. But Delegate Griffin didn't stop there. He also added language that repealed provisions authorizing the Board of Health to use state general funds appropriated to the Department of Health, aka publicly funded state health insurances, to allow a pregnant person to get an abortion if her pregnancy was a result of rape or incest, or if there was extreme fetal abnormalities that was not going to sustain life outside of the womb. It's also worth noting that Delegate Tim Griffin, who wrote this bill, is a lawyer. He is fully aware of the importance of how language is written when it comes to our laws and how they are applied. So the fact that he wrote this bill knowing that someone who wants to go to, say, the emergency room because they're having pain or a heart attack or whatever the case may be, and they're on state-funded insurance, but they can't go to a hospital if they happen to perform abortions for medical reasons, or they need to go to a Planned Parenthood because they are a low-income person and that's the only place in their area that accepts their state-funded health care to get a cancer screening or a pap smear or contraceptives, they now cannot go there if that Planned Parenthood provides abortions. He did that intentionally. He also intentionally put language on saying that if a woman was assaulted by rape or a product of incest, or the fetus has no viability outside of the womb, they also should be forced to not get a payback from their health insurance. Zero coverage. It's also worth noting that the only thing they were willing to roll back on was the rape, incest, and life of the mother, not the fetal abnormalities. And they also weren't willing to address the fact that if you go to a healthcare facility that provides abortion, you can no longer use your health care that you have from the state, even though you're getting a different treatment. Needless to say, all but one Republican, including the individual that introduced the bill, Griffin, voted against the bill because it was an awful bill. But something else really interesting happened during this heated and lengthy debate. Again, the Republican mentioned that Republicans did this in the past when they had the majority, and basically they fast-tracked a bill to the floor because they wanted Democrats to have to go on record as a total house on a certain issue. And even though Democrats weren't happy about it and they also had heated debates around the issue, they still put it to a vote without question. They did not question Speaker Todd Gilbert. They said, okay, we're putting it to vote. They put their stance on the record. This is where the Republicans differ. They were angry. They were mad that they were going to have to go on record on an abortion issue as a whole. So they tried to overrule Don Scott and basically force him to strike the bill, even though he had no intention to do so. In response to them trying to overrule the majority in the House, he made some committee changes. So when she tells you that they're being punished, just remember that her own party admitted they did it last time and they shouldn't have done it, and they don't want Democrats to do it, and they tried to overrule Democrats doing the same behavior they did. Pot, meet kettle. As always, the facts matter, and I will continue to shine light on them.